So I haven't exactly made it any secret that the MCU has been extremely disappointing since Endgame, and the last time I made a dedicated MCU video earlier this year, I was just pretty much at my wit's end with the MCU as a whole. Since then, however, things have essentially gotten worse. Secret Invasion came out, and although the first couple episodes actually hooked their teeth into me, eventually it ended with something that really blew my mind in the worst way imaginable. Also, since then, Jonathan Majors has been involved in a lot of drama, leaving the actor in doubt going forward as the MCU's next big bad as Kang the Conqueror. And just recently, I'm seeing a lot of headlines talking about Kevin Feige potentially thinking about bringing the MCU to an end. Now, about a month ago, I decided to do something that I hadn't done since Endgame came out in 2019, and that is watch the MCU all the way through from Iron Man to now and make a video on my perspective, not having done so in over 4 years. And along the way, I began scripting this video because something became apparent to me halfway through, and that is the MCU needs to move on. It needs to stop. And I'm clearly not the only one thinking this way right now. Captain Midnight actually made a great video touching on a very similar topic as I'm putting this one together, so it's clear that like-minded people are starting to come to the same conclusion. I think it's time that the MCU made a drastic change. Instead of meandering its way to Secret Wars and wrapping up this mess of a multiverse saga, I think it's time they took a page out of DC's book and hit the reset button, so to speak. But how can they possibly do this? Is this even possible? What do I think needs to be done in order for the MCU to get back on top again? Well, we're going to dive deep into that today. But before we do, just a quick word from today's sponsor. This video is sponsored by Skillshare. Skillshare is an online learning community with literally thousands of inspiring and creative classes. It's a place where you can learn new skills and put them to use with a community of like-minded creatives. With classes taught by teachers that are experts in their field, there are a ton of different topics to choose from, anything from photography to graphics design to entrepreneur classes and much more. I've actually been using Skillshare myself to help improve how I operate on YouTube. I took Marques Brownlee's class on YouTube Success, which discussed everything from writing videos, finding a hook to keep viewers engaged, to editing, to posting, YouTube channel growth. And even though I've managed to grow 2 YouTube channels to the point where I've been full-time for a couple of years now, I still learned a lot from that class. So whether you know nothing or even are experienced in that field, there's clearly still a lot to learn here through Skillshare. The first 500 people to use my link will get access to one of Skillshare's best offers ever, 30 days for free and 40% off your first year of your Skillshare membership. So what could it hurt? Check that link out below, and a big thank you to Skillshare for sponsoring this video. So Kevin Feige is and has always been the mastermind behind the juggernaut of what has recently become the biggest film franchise in history. From 2008 to 2019, this guy got a lot of praise as the orchestrator to the huge success that was the Infinity Saga of the MCU. Over a dozen films and billions of dollars at the box office pretty much came down to the ideas of this man. Now, unless you've been living under a rock or have been hitting the copium really hard, you know that the MCU has lost its way since Endgame, with Phase 4 essentially being completely pointless, and Phase 5 progressing the overarching narrative, or lack thereof, into a direction that honestly just seems to be going nowhere. So naturally, now that things have started to go off the rails, or more specifically, have already gone off the rails with the MCU, a lot of people are starting to point their fingers at the man himself, Kevin Feige. There have been a lot of articles recently bringing into question his role in the current landscape of the Marvel Cinematic Universe and its lack of direction. And I think the criticism is fair. If you're going to reap the rewards and praise, you should absolutely be brought into question when things go south. Which is a kind way to put the past few years for Marvel Studios, to be honest. It just so happens that the Secret Invasion director actually came out recently and stated that the abomination that was the finale of Secret Invasion was actually Kevin Feige's idea. And if you've seen the episode, then you know that that is seriously not a good sign. The Secret Invasion director said, and I quote, "It starts with Kevin Feige, who says we're gonna have a Super Skrull fight and all superpowers are fair game." Now, many people have addressed this moment as the moment where the MCU really went too far, and after watching the episode, it's pretty hard to disagree. How Kevin Feige thought this was a good idea is completely beyond me. It completely diminishes what came before and also makes Emilia Clarke's Gaia the most stupidly overpowered character you could possibly imagine. Now, this insanity could work in maybe an Avengers level $250 million film with huge stakes, a lot of build up, but this is a relatively small scale spy espionage show that seemingly had no idea what it was doing. Yet Kevin Feige thought that this was a good idea. And the director of Secret Invasion seems to be taking a little bit of a swipe at Feige over this idea in an attempt to actually deflect the criticism the show generated from this moment. And to be honest, I don't really blame him. Now, there have been rumors floating around that Feige has plans to end the MCU as we know it. Various insiders have come out and said that Secret Wars will mark the end of the MCU as we know it. To be honest though, I almost don't even see the point at the present time of going towards Secret Wars. Secret Wars isn't even going to come close to the heights of the Infinity Saga at this rate. There's been almost zero build up to Secret Wars in 2 phases of the Multiverse Saga so far. And if they hit their release target of May 2027, that leaves only 4 years to build something worth caring about. And to be honest, given what we've had over the past few years, I find it hard to believe that this is going to be the big bang finale that Marvel and Kevin Feige think, due to the clear lack of direction that's so apparent in recent Marvel products. Speaking of that lack of direction, let's really talk about it. So, as I stated at the beginning of the video, I recently rewatched the MCU for the first time since before Endgame released back in 2019. Which leads me on to why I even made this video in the first place, because I've known fully well that the MCU has lost its way and has no direction right now, and I've known that for a while. But I challenge you, go and rewatch the Infinity Saga and compare your experience to post-Endgame MCU. And you will be shocked at just how much worse things are right now than you originally might have thought. I was really hit over the head hard with just how directionless the MCU actually feels by comparison. Phases 1 to 3 always felt like they were building towards something. There was always something brewing in this connected universe. But even when the films strayed away from the main narrative like Ant-Man or Guardians of the Galaxy, there was always a tie-in at some point, seeds planted, something put in place. And it always felt like it took place in the same universe. Now, I already hear some people saying, oh, Marvel's experimenting with different genres now in phases 4 and 5. Not everything has to be connected and a big dumb superhero blockbuster. I've seen a lot of people say this when it comes to the current state of the MCU and people trying to defend it. But the thing is though, you're actually right. Yet phases 1 to 3 managed to experiment with different genres too, yet it still felt like one cohesive vision. In phases 1 to 3, you had your origin stories, you had spy espionage, you had heist films, you had cosmic space adventures, you had the big team-up climax films. Yet it all felt like it belonged in the same universe. In phases 4 and 5, they're still trying to experiment with genres, which is good, such as She-Hulk, for example, being a legal comedy, and I say comedy very loosely. But it just doesn't feel like it belongs. It doesn't feel like She-Hulk realistically takes place in the MCU. Phases 1 to 3 seem to strike a balance for experimenting with genres, yet keeping one cohesive vision in place. But phases 4 and 5 feel like Marvel wanting to branch out into other genres at the sacrifice of the connected nature that the MCU shares, leading fans to become a little jaded as to what's actually going on. It kind of feels like they want the perks of a connected universe because that idea made them so successful in the first place, but this time without actually having to connect anything. It results in the MCU feeling like this sporadic, random mess of films and shows that just feel directionless. But that's a problem when your thing is being a connected universe. You're betraying one of the key hooks of your franchise. Like, take Eternals as a prime example of this. Big dude chilling out in the middle of the ocean literally came out of the planet. Nah, it's fine. We don't talk about that. A celestial covers the entire planet. You don't hear a thing about it. You can literally remove Eternals from the MCU despite the massive global events that took place, yet nothing changes. Nothing. And this was no small heist film event. This was a huge deal that would cause an Avengers level response in phases 1 to 3, but here it's like it never happened. You see what I mean when I say it doesn't feel like things take place in the same universe whatsoever? The illusion of a shared universe is just shattered because they're throwing so much shit out there, but they seemingly can't even keep up with what they're doing. So how the hell are fans supposed to keep up? And it doesn't help that phase 4 of the MCU is literally just one big waste of time. It's the MCU phase with the most content by far, yet it's the one you can skip. Like, that is so backwards. And I think that alone really highlights the problem. It just feels like they're kind of making whatever they want because they can, not because it actually makes sense to do so. I feel like this multiverse idea has just sort of given Kevin Feige the free rein to just do whatever he wants regardless of whether or not it makes sense, because multiverse. Bring back iconic character, prey on nostalgia because multiverse. Kill this character but they're still alive because multiverse. That's why I've kind of grown to kind of hate this multiverse idea in general, to be honest, and it seems like a lot of people are actually starting to turn as well. But the entire premise of this next era of the MCU is built around the multiverse and variants and what have you, and it all leads to Secret Wars. But they've already shown that they can't get the premise of this multiverse saga right. They can't keep it cohesive, so what's the point in meandering your way there? That's the question I and many others believe needs to be raised over at Marvel. Now, I'm all for filmmakers getting experimental with new ideas, new concepts with these characters and worlds. But this is one of the reasons I and many others feel like the MCU needs a reset of sorts. Because the current direction is just not working. Yes, they're still making some money on some of their products, sure. But it's a far cry from the money this franchise made in previous years, and that's not a claim I've pulled out my ass. The numbers speak for themselves. It's pretty wild that here we are in 2023 and a lot of us are thinking that Marvel actually could learn a thing or two from DC. Over at DC, it was acknowledged that things weren't working. It was time for things to move around. Changes in personnel needed to be made and a fresh new direction needed to take place. So they hit the reset button and people are now excited about it instead of scoffing over the next release. Granted, this change in approach has left a few DC films in a purgatory state upon their release, which is still set to continue with Aquaman releasing in a couple months. But as Thanos once said,
"A small price to pay for salvation."
I don't think it's exactly a hot take to say that out of DC and Marvel, DC, they're just doing it better right now overall. Yeah, the numbers might not be there in comparison just yet, and DC is in a very transformative place right now. But as a Marvel fanboy that was always on the Marvel side when it came to Marvel versus DC, I'm 10 times more excited about the future of DC than I am of the future of the MCU. And again, I say that with full confidence as someone who in general has always preferred Marvel. But anyway, we know that oversaturation is a large issue with the current MCU, and it has been for quite a while now. But the downside of oversaturation is an audience that just isn't engaging with the content. We're a few years into this issue already. It's been a problem for a while. The MCU is not as accessible as it once was in those earlier days, as there is just so much shit out there now. Like, how is Timmy down the road supposed to know if he needs to watch Moon Knight to keep up with the MCU story? Or Eternals? Or She-Hulk? Newsflash, Timmy, you don't need to watch any of them because the narrative of this multiverse saga that they're going for barely acknowledges their existence as it is. The MCU objectively functioned better when there was less content. I seriously do not think that can be argued. How the MCU is getting more content than ever before on an annual basis, yet it still feels like nothing is happening, is actually impressive. Marvel need to seriously sit down and take a look at what they're doing with the MCU because they need to change something. Whether it's disengaging with out-of-place politics, toning down the oversaturation of MCU content out there, or simply just writing better and more concise and intentional stories in the first place. There are a mountain of solutions that they can work toward to fix the MCU's downward trajectory, but I still firmly believe that things are a little too far gone at this point to be able to generate the same level of hype as Infinity War and Endgame. And I think Marvel would benefit more from a proper reset. Let the MCU rest, call it a success, until it all went to shit, and just go for something new, something fresh, because it's just not working anymore. So to bring this one home, yeah, the MCU is just in dire need of a reset at this point. I have no doubt that Marvel are going to continue to limp their way to the next Avengers movies, hoping that they can recapture the magic of the MCU's past. But I think any logical human being can see that that time has long since passed and isn't going to be recaptured if they keep going down this path of mediocrity and oversaturation. I think it's time Kevin Feige really considered a reset on the MCU or a drastic change of direction, because a direction riddled in incoherent storytelling, no focus, being more concerned with politics than story and character, and just virtually doing the direct opposite to what made the Infinity Saga so successful. It's all just but guaranteed at this point that the MCU is going to continue to go downhill. Loki might be able to somewhat move things somewhat back on track as it's releasing right now, but it's time for some big changes over at Marvel before Hollywood's biggest juggernaut dissolves into nothing.